How's it going, guys? Jackie Tan back with another video, a little bit unedited. Listen, we're going off the script, all right? We got a good friend, Foos, here, who is new to fighting games and understands a little bit about the FGC terminology, who asked, can anyone explain frames to me? I just understand what are not safe and are safe, but don't get the numbers part. And we love when people like to learn, all right? I love a learner, all right? So here we have Blanka, all right? Our trusty Blanka. Shout out Mo, this is his skin. I'm not going to claim it. I'm just using it because it was already pre-saved. And yep, there we go, right there. Yeah, thanks, because this is the first Street Fighter game, all right? We love newcomers, all right? So, first things first about frames. Okay, what is a frame? A frame can be defined as a singular image in which a character or, anything in the game is moving, okay? So, for example, if I pause right here, they are paused at a singular frame, okay? If I do a move, for example, that is a frame of the move that he is using. So you can just think about it as just one single freeze frame, quote unquote, to define what frames are, okay? Furthermore, a frame and how it ties into the game is going to be a bit different than what you're used to. So whenever you hear like 60 FPS, usually it's 60 frames per second. So for every single second, 60 frames are going to be playing in those intervals. So every single second, 60 frames. Next second, it's going to be more 60 frames. How it pertains to the game, on the other hand, is a little bit more mathematical than some people like, but I'll try to break it down as simple as I can. All right. So let's first start with startup. Okay, startup is very important because that's how you're going to view most moves and how they are on paper. Okay. So startup is going to be just that, how fast the move starts up. So for example, if we take Blanka's fastest light normal, it's going to be stand light kick, okay? And as you can see, there's a little bar down here that kind of indicates with numbers what the startup frame is, how active it is, and the recovery on it. But for now, we're just going to start on the startup, okay? The startup is the green right here, okay? Startup is 1, 2, 3, and then on that fourth frame, the move finally becomes active. So that means that you always know that this move at the bare minimum will come out on the fourth frame, okay? That's important. So every time I do stand light kick, normally it's going to be 4 frame startup, and that's it. Moving on, we have active frames. So this is how long the move is going to stay on the screen before it is no longer going to interact with the opponent. So a good example of this is his crouching medium punch. This is normally 9 frames of startup. As you can see, 8 green frames here, and then on the 9th frame, it's actually active on the screen and can interact with the opponent, okay? However, active frames come into play here, because let's say the move starts like right there. As you can see, I don't know how to get rid of the HUD here, but you can kind of see Blanka, his little arm right here. That move starts on frame 9, and it kind of swings out a bit, right? He goes a little forward, and right there, okay? So this is where active frames come into play, because as you can see, we have the 9 frame startup here, but it doesn't make contact with the opponent until the 10th and the 11th frame of the move, okay? So that's just a good indication of how active some moves are compared to others and how it's applied, because with stand light kick, imagine I'm like right here, it's always going to hit at frame 4 because of the type of move it is, but as you can see with Blanka, his arm kind of swings out a little bit and he goes forward, which allows an active frame to play a bigger part in that move, okay? Similar with moves like stand heavy kick, right? As you can see, we have 7 frame startup, 6 frames of startup, and then on the 7th frame, it's able to make contact with the opponent, and then on the 8th frame, it actually hits the opponent. So you can see it actually was just a small frame off from being its true startup, right? And then there's another case, right, where it's like, damn, like this goes 6 frames, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 frame startup instead. But for the sake of this, whenever a move says startup 7 frames, usually it means just point blank how much time it will take to hit the opponent if it's just a basic point blank move, okay? Now let's talk about recovery, okay? Recovery is pretty simple. It's just the amount of frames it takes for the character to recover from the animation of the move that they just did. So for example, this has 16 frames of recovery, okay? If you make it whiff on an opponent, which means if you whiff, you missed your move, okay? How do we apply this? All right, recovery is important because most oftentimes if you make contact with your opponent, this is going to dictate whether or not you're punishable, whether or not you can take your turn after, or however you want to, categorize it in fighting games. But right now, we're just focused on what moves are relative to the recovery they have. So this is typically -5, which I will get into later. But for right now, just understand that because of this recovery, he is going to be negative in this situation, okay? Now, the next one we're going to talk about is not going to be plus positive, none of that jazz. It's going to be about block stun. This one is important too. Now, this one you don't really have to pay as much attention to as other, frames that are in play, but block stun is important because this helps you kind of manage the situation that you're going to be in. And if you can dictate whether or not you can take your turn there, is reliant on the block stun the opponent is dealing with. So we have a good character like Ken on the other side, and he can simply do something like this. Now, as you can see, block stun is the amount of frames that the opponent is in recovery from a move that you did to them or threw out at them. In this case, it's a fireball. So for 27 frames, he cannot act. All right, he is under the spell of that fireball. He's not going to be able to do nothing about it, okay? On that 28th frame, he can commit to an action afterwards, okay? Now, this is important because this applies to everything in the game that has block stun, okay? The only time this is not applicable is if it is a grab, such as JP command grab with his little ghost, or, anyone that has a relative grab, Zangief, right? Block stun doesn't really come into play in terms of mind games when it comes to throws, because it's either they're going to throw or they're not, but in the case of Ken, let's say for example, he knows he has 27 frames coming out for this fireball if it makes contact and you don't perfect parry it, so he does something like this, right? So because there were 27 frames of block stun added to the fireball, Ken was able to make use of that and close the gap with drive rush and basically take his turn from neutral. That's the basic idea behind it, okay? So that's why block stun is important, and an emphasis on perfect parry as you get better as a player is also necessary. But for now, let's focus on what the frames mean when someone says I'm plus or I'm negative, or I'm punishable, minus. Let's go in the corner. So Blanka is a good example of this because he has a couple of moves that are plus and some that are really unsafe. So for example, this is +2. What that means is that Blanka is actionable for 2 more frames than Ken is once he does that move. So every time he does this move, he is at least +2, which means he can throw this out, which is going to beat people trying to mash or trying to check you for walking up and doing a throw. And a move that is unsafe is forward heavy punch. Now, this is important. Because it is unsafe, you may be asking, well, why the hell would I ever do this if he can always sweep me or, punish me with a certain move? And I will get into this a little bit deeper later, but for now, spacing is also a very important thing in fighting games too. So even though something is unsafe, or it may be plus, for example, let's say I hit this and I'm just so far out, right? I'm +2 here, but I can't really walk up throw like I want to because this is such a large gap to walk, right? When someone is throwing out a button, this is a really long gap to try to walk up and throw. Same with this move. Let's say I throw this out. That's a really large gap for someone to try and punish this just straight up. So that's why spacing is important, because even though you may have plus frames or you may be super negative, you're not necessarily going to be punished or be able to take advantage of the situation like you want to every single time. Now, the last thing I'll talk about with frames, and this is an important one, is I guess pertaining to jumps and what safe jumps are. So we're going to take a very, in fact, I'll switch to Ken for this example because his safe jumps are so easy to actually do. Okay, so this is a safe jump. This is representative of most safe jumps in the game, depending on what your character can do to get a safe jump. Okay. Okay. Now, the key to a successful safe jump is two things. Okay. Most characters in the game have a 5-frame startup anti-air that is invulnerable to jumping attacks. Okay. So as you can see, 4 frames of startup, and then on the 5th frame, it's active. So it starts on the 5th frame. What this means is that if you have a safe jump that is not tightly knit and, you know, practiced with repetition, your opponent can do this to it if it's fake. However, this is a real safe jump. Now, what helps you determine whether or not it's a real safe jump is the magic number 42. There are certain characters in the game, like Chun-Li, like Dhalsim, who have different numbers attached to those characters, but the same is said for Blanka, as well as Ken, as well as Ryu, as well as most characters in the game. To get this plus 42 is dependent on your character, but for the most part, it's not going to change. Now, the second thing that makes a safe jump is whether or not they can do a OD DP afterwards. Now, this one is more important because sometimes you can get away with a fake safe jump if the opponent is not ready and understanding that, hey, this is a fake setup you're trying to do to me. What's more important is the fact that you get rid of this reversal away from someone. And when you do your safe jump, make sure you're holding back, okay? I'm going to set Mr. Kenneth Masters here, almost at OD Shuriken, to do a reversal DP on his wake up, okay? Well, block reversal, excuse me. There we go. And see, because you committed to doing back while you did your jump in, you are now safe from not just those DPs, but you're also safe from these DPs. Okay? Now, to demonstrate what a fake safe jump looks like, I'm going to show you Blanka one more time, because I think this is instructive and will kind of help to instruct more people on how mind games work and knowledge checks, okay? So, I still have Ken set to do wake up, 5-frame anti-air DP, okay? So, let's do this. Okay? Now, why does this happen? This happens because the safe jump that Blanka is doing is only plus 41. Okay, so it's a frame off from being that perfect perfect safe jump number, which allows you to get the safe jump successfully and not get DP'd for it. Now, does this mean not go for it? Not at all. Not everyone knows that sequence is DP punishable by everybody with a 5-frame anti-air DP. And because of that, it doesn't hurt to throw in and say, hey, do you know about this? Because in their mind, they're probably thinking about doing something like this. They're probably thinking about doing parry. All right, that's just simply how it goes. A lot of people won't even consider doing their option there, and you start going for throw. But that's more of a mind game thing. That's really just a matter of, hey, is my opponent awake at the wheel? Do they know which one's a fake safe jump? Do they know which one's a real safe jump? Let me start throwing some of these ideas in, right? And that's kind of the basics of how frames work. And in relation to understanding and getting better at the game, feeling it out is probably the best course of action, because sometimes an idea on paper doesn't look that good, but it works wonderfully in practice. Here's an example. Let's say, for example, Mr. Kenneth here does block reversal, light punch, okay? And let me put him to block real quick. Now, actually, let me show you this real quick, okay? Let's say I do that move right there. That is -4, okay? -4, which means that any 4-frame startup move should be able to punish this. Let's set him to do his 4-frame normal. Okay? So now we understand, okay, spacing is involved, all right? What was punishable before is no longer punishable because in practice, it actually makes perfect sense. Some people want to take their turn back here with a light. guess what? They get punished for it, okay? And these spacing, this is referred to as a spacing trap, by the way, using the negative frames of a move in relation to how much pushback, which is basically how far this move pushes you and your opponent from each other, okay? So every time this move is performed in the corner, it's going to set Blanka a certain amount of distance away from the opponent, to which most characters cannot punish this with a light button, okay? So, with that in mind, every time you do this and someone throws out a light, be like, hey, wait a second. I can beat you because I know that you can't punish me here, and you're trying to take your turn back with a light. So that's really just a breakdown of how frames work, and ultimately getting used to them is just through time in the game, as well as repetition in the game as well. And one thing to remember is startup frames in relation to, like, let's say if they're waking up and you try to do like a meaty setup. So one thing that playing Ken has taught me is how active frames and the numbers matter. So for example, there's a setup that I often go for, which is this. Okay? And that is +6. That is +6. But if I do this normal on block, let's say I have him, block type, stand block only. Let's say this. This is only +3. But the sequence I showed before was +6. How is that possible? Well, active frames are fun because once you start applying your opponent's wake up with the active frames of a move, you can start applying different situations to strengthen those moves, okay? Like, for example, the one I just showed, right? This one being +6 now gets into the idea of like, okay, there's a threat here because he can meaty me with a low. If I'm trying to jump or if I try to jab, it's still going to be his turn. And I may want to risk throwing out a parry here. And normally, guess what? It doesn't work only just on hit, but let's say on block, okay? This is -2 now, okay? It's no longer punishable compared to the other version of it, which is -5, okay? So playing with active frames as you get better is going to be so much more helpful in understanding how they play into character strengths, as well as what you can do and knowledge check the opponent with. Because knowledge checks, even though some people may say, oh, this is a gimmick, the numbers don't lie and the spacing don't lie, all right? Those are two things you can always have in your pocket if you're playing Blanka, if you're playing Ken. No matter who is on this roster, you can make effective use of any active frame during any setup if you're creative enough, okay? And with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video of breaking down frames and also how to kind of explore those frames, how to make effective use of spacing, which moves do what, And if you guys like this content, you know what I'm saying? Subscribe, you know what I'm saying? I don't make YouTube videos that much because, you know what I'm saying? Y'all ain't really fucking with me, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll catch you on the next one.